The wait before the march. Winston Churchill stands at the window of Chequers, staring into the blacked-out English night. The countryside is quiet, but his mind is still full of fire and falling masonry, of sirens and searchlights over London. He rubs his eyes, and for a brief second, the Prime Minister of the British Empire feels like an old man trying to keep a crumbling house from collapsing. He thinks of numbers first, because numbers do not lie, even when politicians do. 2 years of war. Tens of thousands of civilians killed in the Blitz. Cities like Coventry and Liverpool scarred by incendiaries. German armies stretching from the Channel coast to the gates of Moscow. He knows, as any serious war leader must, that courage alone cannot stop steel and oil forever. On his desk lie folders thick with telegrams and reports, but his eyes are drawn instead to a small stack of papers, worn from being handled too often. Letters, not to his cabinet, not to his chiefs of staff, to one man across the ocean, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He remembers the first time he signed a letter, former naval person, a half-joking, half-intimate way of slipping past the stiff formality of diplomacy and speaking directly to another human being who holds destiny in his hands. And I blend. Strand 48. He had gambled then that personal warmth might achieve what official British memoranda could not. A shift in the American soul from wary distance to committed partnership. There is a strange doubleness in Churchill's identity that few of his opponents fully grasp. His father was the very image of the British ruling class, but his mother, Jenny Jerome, brought Brooklyn blood into Blenheim Palace. Churchill has never forgotten that. When he looks westward, he does not see a foreign colossus. He sees cousins, loud, rich, often infuriating cousins, but family all the same. And family, he knows, is what Britain needs now, not in the sentimental sense, but in the brutal arithmetic of war. After the fall of France in 1940, the British Isles have become a lonely fortress on the edge of Hitler's Europe. The Soviet Union, once bound to Germany by a cynical non-aggression pact, has now been dragged into the inferno by Operation Barbarossa. But Stalin's struggle unfolds far away, beyond the horizon of most British citizens. For the people in bomb shelters, the war still feels like Britain against the world. Churchill remembers standing in the House of Commons after Dunkirk, when he vowed that Britain would fight on the beaches, in the fields, in the streets, in the hills, and never surrender. He meant every word. Yet even as he spoke, another voice whispered inside him. Determination is not a substitute for divisions, aircraft, and tonnage. David can slay Goliath once. He cannot do it every year. That cold knowledge has driven his courtship of America. The Lease Act, passed by the U.S. Congress in March 1941, was more than a law. It was a lifeline, thrown from a still hesitant giant to a drowning island. Ship after ship crosses the Atlantic, bringing tanks, aircraft, ammunition, food, the arsenal of democracy, beginning to hum in earnest. But Churchill knows better than anyone that crates of equipment are not the same as beating hearts and marching feet. He thinks often about the psychology of fighting men. In quieter moments, he reads what he can about war in the last generation, of how young Americans once crossed the ocean as doughboys to fight in France. Modern combat studies will later show that most soldiers in battle do not fire out of hatred, but out of a sense of duty to the man beside them, to the group that has become their world. Churchill does not have the jargon of future military psychologists, but he understands instinctively that wars are won when enough men believe they are not alone. Pearl Harbor changes everything. On the evening of December 7th, 1941, word reaches him at Chequers. Japan has struck the American Pacific Fleet. Battleships burn in Hawaiian waters. Thousands of Americans are dead. Churchill listens, hands clasped behind his back, as the details arrive in fragments. The news is ghastly, and yet, in the pit of his stomach, something loosens. He will later admit, with shocking frankness, that he went to bed that night and slept the sleep of the saved and thankful. How can a man feel gratitude in the moment of another nation's tragedy? Churchill wrestles with that question even as he dictates messages to Washington. He is not rejoicing at American death. He is recognizing a terrible truth. Only catastrophe has the power to shatter isolation. What his speeches, his letters, his appeals to shared heritage could not fully achieve, Japanese torpedoes have accomplished in a single morning. Within days, the United States is at war with Japan, and then with Germany and Italy. The map in Churchill's mind redraws itself. He pictures the American industrial belt, Detroit's assembly lines, Pittsburgh's steel mills, the great shipyards along the coasts now legally and morally unleashed for total war. Historians will later note that American wartime production dwarfs that of the Axis, turning out tens of thousands of aircraft and tanks a year. Was ever. Churchill, long before the statistics are printed, already senses that a sleeping colossus is beginning to stretch its limbs. Yet even as he crosses the Atlantic to meet Roosevelt in Washington at the end of 1941, another doubt gnaws at him. He can negotiate strategy, draft communiques, declare unity in front of cameras. But will ordinary Americans truly fight in Europe again? Will their sons step onto ships and sail past the Statue of Liberty into a second European cataclysm? In the quiet of his cabin on the battleship taking him to America, he lets his mind stage a private debate. They will come, one inner voice insists. They came before, in 1917. They will not let tyranny devour the world a second time. Another voice, colder, replies, perhaps. But memory fades. The graves in Flanders are old now. Isolation is comfortable. You are asking them to bleed for islands they have never seen and cities they cannot pronounce. It is this inner argument that will shadow him through the Washington conferences. Because, for all the talk of grand strategy, North Africa or France first, the weight of resources in the Pacific versus Europe, an unspoken question hangs over every meeting. Will American boots ever truly stand in British mud, shoulder to shoulder with exhausted British troops? When Churchill finally returns to Britain, winter has tightened its grip. London is dimmed by blackout regulations, streets still pockmarked by bomb craters from the Blitz. But there is a new, almost imperceptible tension in the air. Rumor that Americans are coming not just as suppliers, but as fellow fighters. He hears the first solid reports in early 1942. Troops have landed in Northern Ireland. More are on the way. By the end of the year, there will be over 100,000 Americans in the British Isles. And by the time any future cross-channel invasion takes shape, well over 1.5 million. The numbers are promising. Yet Churchill knows that for ordinary Britons, numbers on a page mean little. They need to see something they can believe in. He realizes that he, too, needs that. After 2 years of reading casualty lists and scanning shipping losses from the Battle of the Atlantic, his soul is tired in ways he rarely admits aloud. He has spoken brave words to others so often that they sometimes echo hollowly in his own ears. And so, when his staff informs him that a large formation of American troops will be marching through central London, transferring from one rail station to another, he makes a decision without hesitation. I shall see them, he says. Inside, another, quieter thought forms. I must see them. I need to know that they are real. He does not yet know that this march will become one of the emotional hinges of his entire war. He only knows that somewhere between the statistics of American production and the rhetoric of Allied unity, he craves the sight of young faces in foreign uniforms stepping into Britain's story. As his car pulls away toward London on that grey afternoon, Churchill straightens in his seat and closes his eyes for a moment. He pictures the coming scene. Bomb-scarred streets, British clerks and housewives lining the pavements, and down the center of that battered capital, columns of Americans, marching into history. He wonders, not for the first time, when I finally stand there and watch them, will I still feel doubt, or will I, at last, be able to believe, truly believe, that we are going to win? The answer is waiting for him at the end of that London street. Churchill's car moves through London like a ship navigating through wreckage. The city he loves has been gutted and yet stubbornly refuses to die. Entire blocks reduced to skeletal frames, windows blown out, walls blackened by fire. But also shopkeepers sweeping their storefronts, children playing in the rubble, a defiant normalcy stitched over deep wounds. His driver finds a spot near the planned route where the Prime Minister can stand without blocking traffic or drawing too much attention. Churchill steps out, pulling his coat tighter against the damp air. No one has prepared a podium or a formal viewing platform. This is not a parade for him. It is a logistical movement of troops. But Churchill has insisted on being here, and his staff knows better than to argue when he wears that particular expression, half stubborn, half desperate. Around him, Londoners gather. Word has spread that Americans are coming through. Office workers lean from upper windows. Mothers hold small children on their hips. Old men who remember the last war stand with hands in pockets, watching in silence. Churchill notices a boy, no more than 8, clutching a small Union Jack. The boy's coat is patched, his shoes scuffed nearly through. 2 years of rationing have left their mark on every face here, hollow cheeks, tight lips, eyes that have seen too much. 4 ounces of bacon per person per week, 1 egg if you're lucky. Tea so weak it barely stains the cup, and yet they have not broken. Churchill feels a swell of pride mixed with sorrow. These are his people, and he has asked them to endure the unendurable. Then, from the far end of the street, a sound, rhythmic, martial, the crunch of boots on pavement. The crowd shifts, cranes forward, and here they come, American soldiers, columns of them, marching in perfect step. Their uniforms are new, almost startlingly clean compared to the grime of the city around them. Steel helmets gleam dully in the grey light. M1 Garand rifles rest on shoulders. They are young, so impossibly young. Faces unlined by years of war. Skin still carrying the flush of health. Of meals that were never rationed. Of sleep that was not interrupted by air raid sirens. Churchill's breath catches. He has seen British troops march countless times. He has reviewed regiments, inspected honor guards, saluted men heading to the front. But this is different. These are not his soldiers. These are strangers who have crossed an ocean to fight beside his people. The crowd begins to clap, tentative at first. Then louder. A few voices call out, "Welcome, Yanks. Give 'em hell, boys." The Americans grin, waving without breaking stride. One soldier catches sight of the boy with the Union Jack and snaps him a crisp salute. The boy's face lights up like a flare. Churchill watches it all, and something inside him, something he has kept tightly locked for 2 brutal years, begins to crack open. He thinks of the letters he wrote to Roosevelt, each one a carefully crafted argument, wrapped in personal warmth. He thinks of the speeches he gave to Parliament, to the nation, promising that Britain would never surrender. He thinks of the nights he stood on rooftops during the Blitz, watching London burn, asking himself in the dark whether words could ever be enough. And now here is the answer, not in a telegram or a diplomatic communique. Here, in flesh and blood, marching, real. Someone near him, a member of his staff, leans close and asks quietly, "Prime Minister, what do you think?" Churchill does not answer immediately. His eyes are locked on the passing columns. A farm boy from Iowa, maybe, who has never seen a city older than 200 years. A factory worker from Detroit who grew up listening to jazz on the radio. A clerk from New York who probably complained about being drafted. All of them here now, in bomb-scarred London, ready to fight a war that is not, technically, theirs. Historian Stephen Ambrose would later write about the citizen soldiers of World War II, noting that most were not professional warriors but ordinary men thrust into extraordinary circumstances. Churchill does not need a historian to tell him that. He can see it in their faces. They are nervous, excited, a little overwhelmed, and utterly, magnificently here. His aide tries again. "Sir," Churchill's voice, when it finally comes, is thick. "When I see these young men, I know we are going to win this war." The words are simple, but they land with the weight of a vow. Those standing nearby will later recount that the Prime Minister's eyes were wet, his hand trembling slightly as he raised it in a half-salute to the passing troops. One does not often see Winston Churchill weep in public. He is a man of grand rhetoric, of defiant speeches, of brandy and cigars and bulldogish determination. But in this moment, the armor cracks, because for 2 years, he has carried Britain on his back. Every decision, where to send a few available aircraft, which convoy to protect, which city can be left vulnerable, has rested on his shoulders. Every casualty report has been a knife in his chest. Every bombed neighborhood a personal failure. And through it all, he has wondered, in the small hours of the morning when no aides are present and no speeches need to be made, can we actually win this? Or am I simply leading my people into a long, slow defeat? The Americans answer that question, not with statistics, though the numbers are staggering. American industrial capacity will eventually produce more war materiel than all the Axis powers combined, not with strategy papers, though the plans for North Africa, Italy, and eventually Normandy are already being sketched in smoke-filled rooms, but with presence, with the sight of thousands of young men willing to march into hell because it is the right thing to do. Churchill exhales slowly, as if releasing a breath he has been holding since 1940. "They are so young," he murmurs, almost to himself. "So strong, so confident." He watches a particularly tall soldier, a Texan, perhaps, judging by the easy swagger march past. And Churchill thinks about the American spirit, that strange mix of optimism and raw power that has always both impressed and slightly baffled Europeans. "Look at them," he says, voice gaining strength now. "They have come 3,000 miles to help us. They have come to fight for freedom, for civilization, for everything we have been defending." His aide scribbles notes, knowing that these words might find their way into history. But Churchill is not performing now. He is processing something deeper. A shift in his soul from grim endurance to genuine hope. "Hitler," Churchill continues, voice rising, "has made his greatest mistake. The columns keep coming, seemingly endless. He thought America would stay neutral, would stay out of Europe's wars. He thought Britain would fall or surrender. He thought wrong on both counts." A pause. Churchill pulls out his handkerchief and wipes his eyes without shame. Now he faces not just Britain, not just Russia, but America as well. The greatest industrial power on Earth, the greatest reserve of manpower, all of it now committed to his destruction. Around him, the small crowd of staffers and bystanders absorbs his words. Some nod, some blink back their own tears, because they, too, have lived through the Blitz, the defeats in Greece and Crete, the endless anxiety of the Battle of the Atlantic where German U-boats hunted British convoys like wolves, and they, too, have wondered if survival was the best they could hope for. But now, watching these Americans march through their shattered city, hope feels possible again. Churchill lets the moment stretch. He does not rush to leave. He stands there, hand raised in salute, as column after column passes. An hour, more. His legs ache, his back protests. But he does not move. It is as if he is absorbing something vital from the sight, storing it up for the dark days he knows still lie ahead. Because the war is not over. France remains under Nazi occupation. The Eastern Front is a meat grinder consuming millions of lives. The Pacific theater has just exploded into brutal island warfare. Victory is not assured, but it is, for the first time in 2 years, believable. The march does not end with tears and sentiment. War is never that simple. In the weeks and months following that emotional London parade, a more complicated reality sets in. Over 100,000 American servicemen are now stationed across the British Isles. And by the time Operation Overlord launches in 1944, that number will swell to over 1.5 million. And with them comes not just hope, but friction. The phrase spreads like wildfire through British pubs and parlors. Overpaid, oversexed, and over here, it is said with a smile. Usually, but the smile has teeth. British soldiers, paid a fraction of what their American counterparts earn, watch as GIs hand out chocolates to children, buy rounds of drinks without thinking twice, and court British girls with resources that seem almost obscene. A British private makes perhaps 14 shillings a week. An American private makes 5 times that, with access to PX supplies that include cigarettes, candy, nylon stockings, luxuries that have vanished from British civilian life. British families, subsisting on rations that allow 4 ounces of bacon per person per week, hear stories of American mess halls serving steak, mashed potatoes, apple pie, ice cream. Resentment simmers, not everywhere, and not always, but enough to create tension. Churchill hears the complaints. His intelligence reports include snippets of grumbling from both sides. British soldiers muttering that the Americans are all flash, no experience. American soldiers complaining that the British are stuffy and ungrateful. Bar fights break out in port towns. Rivalries flare over women, over perceived slights, over the tiny indignities that happen when 2 proud military cultures collide. But Churchill, ever the strategist, waves it away when his aides bring it up. "Of course there is friction," he says impatiently during one staff meeting. "Put any 2 groups of young men together and there will be friction. But they are on our side. That is what matters. They are here, they are real, and they are going to help us win." Still, he knows that morale is not just a matter of policy. It is built person by person, handshake by handshake. And so Churchill makes a decision. He will visit American bases himself, not in grand, staged ceremonies, but quietly, catching soldiers in their everyday routines. He wants them to know that Britain exhausted, battered, Britain sees them and values them. The first visit is to a camp somewhere in the English countryside. Churchill arrives with minimal warning, his car rolling up to rows of Quonset huts and olive-drab tents. American soldiers, caught off guard, scramble to attention, but Churchill waves them at ease. "Relax, relax," he says, cigar clamped between his teeth. "I am not here to inspect boots. I am here to say thank you." He walks among them, asking questions. "Where are you from?" "Texas, sir." Churchill's face lights up. "Texas? I have been to Texas. Wonderful state, vast and full of energy. You Texans are known for your fighting spirit. We shall need that spirit in the days ahead." The soldiers grin, charmed despite themselves. This bulldog-faced British politician knows about Texas. At another base, he encounters a group of fresh arrivals, still processing the shock of being in a foreign country at war. They are homesick, uncertain, a little afraid. Churchill sees it in their faces. He stops, looks them in the eye. "You have come a long way," he says quietly. "You have left your homes, your families, everything familiar. You have come to a country that has been at war for over 2 years, that is tired and worn. But I tell you this, your arrival has lifted our spirits more than you can possibly know. When we see you, we see hope, we see strength, we see victory." One young soldier, barely 18, later writes home, "I met Winston Churchill today. He shook my hand. I think he actually meant it." Churchill does mean it, because he understands something that pure strategists sometimes miss. Wars are fought by human beings, not divisions on a map. And human beings need to feel that their sacrifice matters. Meanwhile, the strategic debates rage on behind closed doors. Churchill and his American counterparts argue over the direction of the war. Churchill favors what he calls the soft underbelly of Europe's strategy, striking through Italy and the Balkans, bleeding Germany in the Mediterranean theater before launching a cross-channel invasion. The Americans, led by General George Marshall and later by Dwight Eisenhower, push for a more direct approach. Land in France, drive straight into Germany, end the war as quickly as possible. The arguments are fierce. Churchill worries that a premature invasion of France will result in catastrophic casualties. Another Gallipoli. The Americans worry that Churchill's Mediterranean strategy is a distraction, prolonging the war unnecessarily. In the end, compromise is reached. North Africa first, then Sicily, then Italy, buying time to build up forces for the eventual Normandy invasion. But, through all the strategic wrangling, one fact remains constant. American power is now fully committed to the European theater, and that changes everything. Churchill, in quieter moments, reflects on the psychology of it all. He has read accounts from the previous war, memoirs of soldiers describing the terror and tedium of trench warfare. Modern combat studies, though Churchill does not have access to the term yet, will reveal that most soldiers do not fight out of hatred for the enemy, but out of loyalty to the men beside them, to the small unit that becomes their entire world. Churchill grasps this instinctively. He knows that the bond between British and American soldiers, forged in shared danger, will be stronger than any formal treaty, and so he continues his visits. He shakes hands, tells jokes, listens to stories. He learns about farms in Kansas, factories in Pennsylvania, diners in California. He absorbs the sheer scale of America, its optimism, its energy, its terrifying industrial might, and he marvels at how this young nation, barely more than a century and a half old, has become the arsenal of democracy. One evening, after a particularly long day of meetings, Churchill sits alone in his study at 10 Downing Street. He lights a cigar, pours a whiskey, and allows himself a rare moment of unguarded reflection. "We are going to win," he murmurs to the empty room. "Not easily, not quickly, but we are going to win." Outside, London sleeps uneasily, still scarred by war. But inside Churchill's mind, a new certainty has taken root. The Americans are here, not just in spirit or in supply crates, but in marching boots and beating hearts. And that, he knows, will make all the difference. End of Act 3, ACT 4, the breaking point and the promise. The euphoria of the march fades, war grinds on, and Churchill, for all his renewed hope, faces his darkest hours yet. By mid-1942, the global situation is dire. In the Soviet Union, the Eastern Front devours men by the millions as German and Soviet armies clash in a brutal, existential struggle. In North Africa, British forces under General Montgomery are locked in a seesaw battle with Rommel's Afrika Korps. In the Atlantic, German U-boats continue to sink Allied shipping faster than it can be replaced. And in the Pacific, Japan rampages across Southeast Asia, threatening British possessions in Burma and India. Churchill reads the reports with a growing sense of dread. Yes, America is now in the war, but American forces are still being trained, equipped, organized. They are not yet the overwhelming tide he knows they will eventually become. In the meantime, Britain bleeds. The fall of Singapore in February 1942 is a catastrophic humiliation. Over 80,000 British and Commonwealth troops surrender to a smaller Japanese force. Churchill will later call it the worst disaster and largest capitulation in British history. He takes the news like a physical blow. In Parliament, his voice cracks as he delivers the grim update, trying to steel a nation already worn thin by years of bad news. Criticism mounts. Political rivals smell weakness. Whispers begin. Is Churchill the right man to lead Britain through this? Is his rhetoric enough to make up for strategic failures? He faces a vote of no confidence. It fails, but the fact that it even happens shakes him. Late one night, alone in his study, Churchill stares at a map of the world. Red pins mark Axis positions. Blue pins mark Allied positions. There is far too much red. He thinks about the young American soldiers he watched march through London, and for a moment, doubt creeps back in. Will there be enough of them? He wonders. Will they arrive in time? Will we survive long enough to see victory? He pours another whiskey. His hand trembles slightly. Not from age, though he is nearing 70, but from exhaustion. 2.5 years of carrying the fate of a nation. 2.5 years of impossible choices. Send fighters to protect this convoy or that city? Divert resources to Egypt? Or keep them in England? Trust Stalin, who was Hitler's ally just months ago. How much can one man bear before he breaks? Churchill does not break, but he bends. In his private correspondence, unguarded moments slip through. To Roosevelt, he writes not just as a statesman, but as a man desperate for reassurance. We need you. Not just your factories, but your men. Soon, Roosevelt responds with warmth and promises, but also with the hard reality that American forces are not yet ready for a major European offensive. Churchill understands, but understanding does not make the waiting easier. And then, slowly, the tide begins to turn. In November 1942, Operation Torch, the Allied invasion of North Africa, launches. American and British forces land in Morocco and Algeria, catching German and Italian forces off guard. It is the first major Anglo-American operation of the war, and despite some rocky moments, it succeeds. Churchill allows himself a breath of relief. Not victory yet, but proof that the alliance can work. Proof that American soldiers, green and untested, can learn quickly and fight hard. Proof that the young men he saw marching through London were not just symbols, but warriors in the making. By early 1943, the momentum shifts further. The Soviets grind the German Sixth Army into dust at Stalingrad, marking the beginning of Germany's long retreat in the east. In North Africa, the combined Anglo-American forces squeeze Rommel into Tunisia and force a massive Axis surrender. And in the Atlantic, improved tactics and technology begin to turn the Battle of the Atlantic in favor of the Allies' U-boat losses mount, and convoys start getting through more reliably. Churchill, watching the reports, feels something he has not felt in years. Not just hope, but confidence. He remembers standing on that London street, watching the Americans march past. And he understands now what that moment meant. It was not just about numbers or firepower. It was about a shift in the story Britain was telling itself. For 2 years, Britain's narrative was one of survival. We can endure. We will not surrender. But survival is a grim, exhausting goal. It does not inspire generations. It does not win wars. The Americans changed the narrative. Now the story was, we will win, not just survive, win. And that psychological shift, as much as any weapon or tactic, began to reshape the war. Churchill, in his memoirs written years later, will return again and again to the theme of the special relationship between Britain and America. He will write about the bond forged in shared sacrifice, the partnership of English-speaking peoples, the importance of maintaining that alliance in the post-war world. Some will read it as political strategy, Churchill positioning Britain as America's closest ally in the coming Cold War. But those who knew him in the war years understand that it is also deeply personal. Churchill genuinely loves America, flaws and all. He loves its brashness, its optimism, its refusal to accept that anything is impossible. He loves it because, in Britain's darkest hour, America came. Not immediately, not without hesitation, but eventually, when it mattered most, America came. And for that, Churchill will be forever grateful. The war in Europe is in its final, brutal weeks. Soviet armies are closing in on Berlin from the east. American, British, Canadian, and Free French forces are sweeping across Germany from the west. Hitler, trapped in his bunker, will soon take his own life. The Third Reich, which promised 1,000 years, is collapsing after 12. Churchill, now 70 years old, watches the endgame unfold with a mixture of triumph and exhaustion. Victory is no longer in doubt, but the cost has been staggering. American casualties in the European theater exceed 300,000, with over 100,000 dead. British and Commonwealth losses are similarly devastating. Soviet losses dwarf them both. Estimates run into the tens of millions. And civilian deaths, particularly among Europe's Jewish population, reveal horrors that will scar the world's conscience for generations. Churchill thinks often now about the young men he saw marching through London in 1942. How many of them are still alive? How many fought at Omaha Beach on D-Day, wading through bullets and blood to secure a toehold in France? How many froze in the Ardennes during the Battle of the Bulge, when a desperate German counteroffensive nearly split the Allied lines? How many walked through the horrors of liberated concentration camps, seeing firsthand what they had been fighting against? War is not a story with clean heroes and villains, Churchill knows. It is mud and chaos and young men dying in agony far from home. But some wars, he believes, must be fought. Some evils are so great that to stand aside is to become complicit, and the young Americans who crossed the Atlantic understood that, perhaps not in grand philosophical terms. Most were just kids who wanted to do their duty and get home. But in their willingness to march into danger for a country not their own, they embodied something rare and precious. Churchill, in one of his final wartime speeches, pays tribute to them. The American soldiers who came to Britain brought with them not just weapons, but a spirit of generosity and courage that will never be forgotten. They fought alongside us, bled alongside us, and together we achieved what once seemed impossible. He pauses, voice thick with emotion. We are forever in their debt. The speech is broadcast across Britain and America. In living rooms and pubs, people listen and remember. British citizens think of the GIs who handed out candy to their children, who danced with their daughters, who died on foreign beaches so that Europe might be free. American families think of their sons and brothers who never came home, who lie buried in military cemeteries across France, Belgium, Italy, and Germany. The gratitude is real, but so is the grief. As Germany surrenders in May 1945, and the war in Europe officially ends, Churchill allows himself a rare moment of reflection. He thinks back to that grey afternoon in 1942 when he stood on a London street and wept at the sight of American soldiers. He had said then, "When I see these young men, I know we are going to win this war." And he had been right, not because of any one battle or strategy, but because the entry of America fully committed, industrially overwhelming, morally engaged, had shifted the fundamental balance of power. Germany, for all its early victories and brutal efficiency, could not match the combined might of Britain, America, and the Soviet Union. The mathematics of war, in the end, proved decisive. But Churchill also knows that mathematics alone do not explain victory. Wars are won by men who believe they are fighting for something worth dying for. And the young Americans he saw marching through London believed. They believed in freedom, in democracy, in the idea that tyranny must be opposed. Not perfectly, America itself was still grappling with racial segregation and its own demons. But imperfectly, messily, courageously, they came. And that made all the difference. In the years after the war, Churchill will argue passionately for maintaining the Anglo-American alliance. He will coin the phrase special relationship to describe the bond between Britain and the United States. He will warn of new threats, the Soviet Union, the Iron Curtain descending across Europe, the onset of the Cold War. And through it all, he will hold up the memory of World War II as proof that when free peoples stand together, they cannot be defeated. Some historians will later question whether Churchill romanticized the alliance, whether he overstated Britain's role or understated American impatience with British imperial ambitions. Fair critiques, perhaps, but those who stood on London streets in 1942 and watched American soldiers march past do not need historians to tell them what they felt. They felt hope returning after years of darkness. They felt the burden of solitary struggle beginning to lift. They felt, for the first time in a long time, that the future might be something other than grim survival. And Churchill, standing among them, felt all of that and more. He felt vindication for his years of pleading with Roosevelt. He felt relief that Britain would not have to face annihilation alone. He felt gratitude so overwhelming that tears came unbidden. And he felt deep in his bones, the certainty that this moment, this sight of young Americans marching into history, would define not just the war, but the world that would emerge from it. Decades later, long after Churchill has passed from the world stage, the image endures. An old man standing on a bomb-scarred street, tears streaming down his face, watching foreign soldiers march into his country's story. It is a reminder that wars are not just fought with tanks and planes. They are fought with hope, with partnership, with the willingness of strangers to become brothers. And on that grey London afternoon in 1942, Winston Churchill witnessed the birth of an alliance that would reshape the world. "When I see these young men," he had said, "I know we are going to win this war." He was right. They did.